Alright, in this second half of chapter 1, we will be looking at the characteristics of a good critical thinker. Now, if you look at your slides, we have 8 significant characteristics that defines a good critical thinker, among many others. So, what we understood from the previous lesson was that critical thinking does not comprise of merely one skill, but rather a collection of skills that enhance and reinforces each other. Therefore, when we look at good critical thinkers, you need to encompass at least some of these characteristics. One of the many characteristics is analytical skills. Now, what do we see as analytical skills? Analytical skills basically means your ability to analyze and provide logical support for what you believe in. This means you're not just saying something for the sake of saying it, but you're providing logical support and elaborating or defining your beliefs in order for people to understand it better. At the same time, you are also critically examining it to ensure that what you're saying is factual or makes sense. At the same time, having analytical skills alone is not enough, because most of the time when you are providing a belief or a reasoning of any sort, you are communicating with other people, and therefore communication and literacy skills are equally as important. This is because you will be talking to other people, be it in any language or any form of communication. This means that what you're saying has to be delivered in a clear and understandable manner. This also means that you're not merely speaking or writing effectively, but you're also able to listen to what other people are saying. At this point, it is very important that you are able to be aware of what kind of communication style you have and how it can be used to convey what you're trying to say effectively. If you are a communicator who is able to communicate in a very assertive manner, then you are able to ascertain and describe what you're trying to say without confusing your listeners. At the same time, if you are someone who is more of an aggressive communicator, then you might need to tone it down for them to understand what you're trying to say. Being a passive communicator might be problematic if you're trying to prove a point to a person. Therefore, this is why having proper communication as well as literacy skills is crucial in ensuring that whoever is talking with you is able to understand what you're trying to say. Next, you also need to make sure that whatever you're saying is something that is supported with proper facts. This means that you need to make sure that one of the other characteristics that you have is research and inquiry skills. This means that you're not supposed to be coming up with your opinion without actually doing the research before saying it. At the same time, this also means that you must inquire and collect enough information to make sure that what you're trying to say is something that makes sense and has been supported by facts. Always feel the need to ask questions. Never be afraid of asking questions, because when you ask questions, that's the only way you understand things better. So be it in a lecture or even during a tutorial, ask questions if you're not sure, because this not only enhances your knowledge, it also enables you to develop your critical thinking skills. So having the right research and inquiry skills will ensure that you're able to gather, evaluate, as well as synthesize what sort of evidence that you have collected. Another significant characteristic of a good critical thinker is also flexibility and tolerance of ambiguity. Now, this means that if things are not going your way, it doesn't mean that you have to continue thinking in that way. This basically means that you need to be flexible. You need to understand that change is something that happens all the time, and therefore, if your opinion is something that does not fit with whatever that's going on, you might need to be flexible enough to change your opinion a little. So this means that you are able to flexibly adapt to different sorts of situations, as well as understand that there is inherent ambiguity in human existence. Therefore, this means that most of the time, not everything is black and white. There's always going to be gray area, so you need to be able to allow room for ambiguity. Another characteristic is being open-minded. Now, being open-minded is something that we often talk about. You know, a person who is a good critical thinker in this modern day is someone who's very open-minded. But bear in mind that being open-minded also has its limitations. Being open-minded doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to follow whatever everyone else says openly. It means that you have an open mind which is wide enough for you to understand the opinions of others, but at the same time be able to judge and discern whether or not these opinions can be accepted. Therefore, you must also maintain a certain amount of skepticism when being open-minded. So, being open-minded mainly means that you have the ability to overcome your personal prejudices as well as biases, especially when encountering situations whereby you're working with people who come from very different backgrounds, be it educational, racial, or cultural backgrounds. So being able to overcome these prejudices and biases will enable you to critically examine things from all sides before actually coming to a proper decision. So, like I said earlier, when you're looking at open-minded skepticism, we have two different methods that you can employ. You can either choose to look at the method of doubt, which was developed by René Descartes, or you can choose to look at the method of belief. Now let's look at each of these methods one by one. The method of doubt basically means that you're setting aside your preconceptions and adopting a default position of skepticism. So what this means is that you are putting aside whatever preconceptions, whatever ideas or opinions that you may have formed before being in that situation, and coming up with a position of skepticism, meaning I am going to doubt everything before I actually believe it. On the other hand, the method of belief means that you are suspending the doubts and biases that you have, and you choose to be genuinely open to what people with opposing views are saying. So this means that you are being empathetic towards what other people are saying. At the same time, you are actively listening to what they are saying. Now, both of these methods contrast with one another because on one hand, you are choosing to push aside all the doubt that you have, but at the same time, you're not entirely believing what everyone else is saying. Therefore, it means that you are not trusting the person until they have given you something worth trusting. On the other hand, the method of belief also includes pushing aside your doubts and bias, but at the same time, you are maintaining an open mind, meaning you are willing to accept what other people are saying. Therefore, you start off with a belief instead of a doubt. Talking about the method of doubt, let's look at the person who developed this idea. Now, René Descartes was basically one of the main philosophers who was known for developing critical thinking. He was the person who put in the idea of method of doubt as a method of critical analysis. So most of the time he said that in order for us to understand something, you must say that you do not trust anything at all at first. So having this position of skepticism will enable you to come to a better understanding. So like I mentioned earlier, having an open mind doesn't necessarily mean that you openly accept everything. You may choose to doubt everything before believing it, or you may choose to believe everything before coming to a proper understanding. The choice depends on how you perceive things. Another good characteristic for a critical thinker is having the ability to creatively solve your problems. Now, solving problems is extremely crucial for anyone regardless of which situation they're in. But coming up with a solution in a creative manner, now that's where most people tend to falter. So being able to creatively solve your problems means that you're not just looking at finding a solution, but rather you're looking at your problem from multiple perspectives before actually coming up with the right solution for this complex problem. Therefore, this means that your problem might not necessarily come to a conclusion immediately and may take time. So this is why being able to creatively solve problems doesn't only mean that you're sitting thinking of a solution, but rather you're incorporating all the characteristics of a good critical thinker, combining them together to come up with the right solution. Another important characteristic is being attentive, being mindful, as well as curious. Now, having the right ability to remain curious and attentive is something that is very difficult. Especially being a student, it is very important that you remain attentive to what is being told to you. At the same time, being mindful also means that you're respecting the different perspectives, respecting the diversity and multiple opinions that may come in front of you. Now, we're not saying that being mindful means that you accept everything. Being mindful basically means you're aware of all of these differences. You're paying attention to what they are, and at the same time, you're curious enough to understand that these things may or may not be applicable to you. So, most of the time, people tend to mistake mindfulness as being open-minded. Bear in mind, they are two completely different things. Mindful means you're respectful of what is going on around you. Open-minded is you're more accepting to different things. Another important skill is, of course, collaborative learning skills. Like I mentioned earlier, when you're in a college or in a working environment, you tend to collaborate with other people. So this means that you're definitely going to be viewing the opinions of other people who come from very different backgrounds as from you do. Therefore, you need to be able to recognize and anticipate how other people are going to react to what you're saying, and you must also have a certain amount of willingness to work with these people in order to not just share your knowledge, but also gain knowledge from them. When you combine each of these skills together and come up with the right solution or come up with the right opinion that you're forming, then you will see how this opinion is completely different from an opinion that is based on your personal ideas without proper research. So, looking at all of these skills and combining them, let's ask ourselves, why must we be critical thinkers? What is the big deal? Critical thinking is not just about abstract thought. Now, it's not just about sitting down in a room and thinking about an idea. Thinking is something that we can't shut off. It is something that we do on a daily basis, whether we realize it or not. But critically thinking about things is where you're aware of what you're thinking and you're applying the skills that you have in order to come up with the right solution or the right thought, basically. So critical thinking is not just about coming up with the right thought. It's also a way of reflecting on your own personal development. Now, this may sound like a motivational talk, but at the end of the day, when you combine all the skills that you have and you come up with the right solution for things, undoubtedly you will feel good about yourself because you know that you have reached a certain level of understanding, and therefore, indirectly, you would feel good about what you have achieved. So this means that critical thinking is also about self-improvement and seeing how you develop as a person. When you are able to see your development, you are also indirectly able to examine yourself and see what are the areas that you need to work on. So whether you realize it or not, by being a proper critical thinker, you're indirectly helping yourself to develop as a more sensible and mature person. So indirectly, what happens is that critical thinkers, good critical thinkers specifically, are able to take charge of their lives and choices. This means that they can develop their communication skills as assertive communicators who are able to handle whatever situation that's given to them. So by contrast, if you were to look at a person who is a poor critical thinker, these are the sort of people that will allow themselves to be controlled by circumstances. And therefore, because they are unable to handle the problems that have been given to them, their problems rarely get solved. And this can also result in other situations which can be both emotional as well as affecting them socially. Now we will look at what sort of problems can occur which prevent us from being good critical thinkers in the following lesson. So one important thing that you need to ensure is that if you do not want to be someone who is branded as a poor critical thinker, you need to understand whether or not you have these skills. Now, if you do not have the skills that make a person a good critical thinker, it doesn't mean that it's never going to come to you. It basically means you just need to find ways or methods in order to develop these skills. Therefore, indirectly, you will be able to come up with the right plan on how to handle situations that are thrown at you, and indirectly, this will avoid problems that can affect you emotionally as well as socially. So, aside from these main characteristics, there are also other features that makes a person a critical thinker. One of the other things that we will talk about is the ability to challenge social injustice, as well as being able to respond intelligently and thoughtfully to challenges to our own belief systems. Now, this is something that's very commonly found among people, be it students or working adults. Most of the time, you come across situations where you're uncomfortable or situations in which you feel you're being treated unfairly. So being a good critical thinker will provide you with the platform to respond in an intelligent way as well as thoughtful way. When your thoughts have got substance, people take you more seriously. At the same time, this will also cultivate your self-esteem, your proactiveness, and your self-direction. So having high self-esteem, being proactive, being able to do things without being told is also one of the features that makes a person a critical thinker. This sort of situations can also be found in politics, for instance. A politician who is able to come up with ideas or come up with solutions for problems that the citizens may find themselves facing is a politician that is able to think critically. But a politician who waits for the citizens to tell them the problems is not someone who is proactive. So the next time you're watching the news or the next time you're listening to a politician speak, take note of the way they present. You will be able to determine whether or not this person is a critical thinker. By being able to do that, you will also be able to see how you can develop those skills. Now, we will also look at the idea of critical thinkers in democracy. Most of the time, democracy is a place where you're able to project what you're saying, you're able to participate actively. So being a critical thinker in a democracy, you have an obligation to be well informed about policies as well as issues that are occurring in your respective countries. So this means that you are able to come up with proper discussion, critical discussions which may help you to make decisions that can affect a society. Most of the time when we talk about democracy, we always talk about the idea of freedom of speech as well as listening to the opinions of different people. So these are very important. You need to have freedom of speech, meaning the ability to explain and express your thoughts. But at the same time, being able to express your thoughts doesn't mean that you're disregarding what everyone else is saying. Listening to opponents and opposing views is also very essential because this helps you to develop your critical thinking skills. So looking at modern democracies, one thing that we can say in terms of politics is that democracies can encourage diversity and open discussion of different ideas. So indirectly, if you live in a democracy, indirectly your society is encouraging you to be an active critical thinker. So most of the time what happens is if a person is a critical thinker, they are less likely to be influenced by faulty arguments or rhetoric. Faulty arguments are mainly defined as arguments that are not properly formulated and therefore do not come to a proper conclusion. At the same time, a good critical thinker is able to ascertain what a rhetorical person is speaking or a rhetorical speech is talking about and be able to come up with a proper understanding of what needs to be done. So most of the time we say that critical thinking contributes to our own well-being as well as the well-being of a society and a democracy because it also teaches us to stand up to authority and irrational thinking. Therefore, when you are trying to be a good critical thinker, you need to also understand and recognize barriers that may hinder you from thinking and standing up to different sorts of ideas. Now, this is an issue or this is a section of critical thinking that we will examine in the next lecture. Thank you.